The notification arrived on a Tuesday, or what Kezzik station calendar designated as a Tuesday, the Drova-An Administrative Authority having adopted the 7-day human week for interspecies scheduling convenience approximately 40 years ago, a decision that Kezzik had noted in his personal records as sensible and had filed no complaint about, which was the highest endorsement he gave to most things. He read it once, then again, then a third time, which was unusual. Kezzik rarely needed more than one pass through an official document, and then a fourth, which had not happened to him in recent memory. Interspecies Transit Partnership Act. Implementation noticed, effective immediately upon receipt. Waystation Korreth-9 is redesignated as a joint Drovan human customs and transit facility under the provisions of Article 7, Section 3 of the above Act. A co-inspector from the Human Colonial Transit Authority will be assigned to your posting and will arrive at your facility within the next available transit window. Please prepare standard joint posting orientation materials per Appendix D of the Interspecies Personnel Integration Guidelines. Kezzik set down the document. He picked it up again. He set it down. He filed a formal acknowledgement of receipt, a compliance confirmation, and a preparatory incident prevention framework document he had written himself over the following 3 hours, 12 pages, covering anticipated procedural discrepancies, recommended communication protocols, and a section on equipment handling standards that he was, in retrospect, rather proud of. He filed all three with Administrator Prex's office before the end of shift. Prex's automated system confirmed receipt and noted that the documents had been added to the queue for review, estimated processing time 4 to 6 weeks. That had been 11 days ago. The shuttle arrived on schedule. Kezzik stood in the docking bay with the orientation packet he had printed, on actual physical paper, because the Appendix D guidelines specified physical documentation for initial joint posting orientation, and he had followed the specification and watched the shuttle extend its boarding ramp. The human came down it carrying 2 duffel bags and a toolbox. Not a regulation-issue equipment case. A toolbox, the kind with latches on the side and a worn handle and what appeared to be a sticker on the lid that Kezzik's high-resolution compound eyes resolved, at 10 meters, into a stylized cartoon of a primate holding a wrench. Kezzik looked at the sticker. He looked at the rest of the human, medium height, medium build, gone slightly soft at the edges, gray hair kept short, moving with the unhurried gait of someone who had walked across a lot of difficult ground and learned not to fight the surface. The human reached the bottom of the ramp, looked around the docking bay with an expression Kezzik could only categorize as professional assessment, the look of someone noting load-bearing capacity and ventilation adequacy and possible choke points, all at once, and then looked at Kezzik. "Kowalski," he said. "Dave." He set down one of the duffel bags, reached into a side pocket, and produced a thermos. "Coffee?" Kezzik's compound eyes cycled through 3 rapid focal adjustments. "I do not consume coffee," he said. "I have prepared an orientation packet." He held it out. Dave looked at the packet. He looked at the thermos. He put the thermos back in his pocket and accepted the packet with the same unconcerned ease with which he appeared to do most things. "Thanks," he said. He turned it over, noted its thickness, 47 pages. Kezzik had been thorough and tucked it under his arm. "Nice station. Compact." Korreth-9 is a mid-tier transit facility, Kezzik said. "It is designed for operational efficiency rather than scale." "That's a good way to be," Dave said. He picked up his duffel bag. "Which way's the bunk room?" Kezzik showed him the bunk room. He showed him the inspection bay, the cargo processing terminal, the equipment storage, the emergency systems panel. Dave walked through all of it with the same quiet, noting attention, touching nothing without asking, which Kezzik had not expected and noted as a point in his favor, and asked 3 questions. Where was the primary power relay? What was the maintenance schedule for the atmospheric recycler? And was that cargo scanner the Mark IV or the Mark V? Kezzik answered all 3. The third answer, Mark IV, primary relay unit, recurring fault. 3 outstanding maintenance requests over the past 2 years, produced a brief thoughtful pause from Dave that Kezzik did not know how to categorize. And then Dave said, and moved on. That evening, Kezzik reviewed the Appendix D orientation guidelines and confirmed that he had completed all required steps. He filed a completion confirmation with Administrator Prex's office. He sat at his terminal and looked at the inspection bay through the window, where the 7 malfunctioning cargo drones sat in their charging ports with the silent reproach of equipment that had been failing gradually for long enough to have become a normal condition. He had worked alone for a long time. The station had felt, in that time, precisely the right size. He did not file a report about this. It was not a reportable condition. He closed his terminal and went to sleep. The scanner failed at 0840 the next morning, which was, at minimum, consistent with its behavior for the past 2 years. The primary relay fault was familiar enough that Kezzik had already begun the manual inspection routing protocol before the fault light had finished blinking. Log the fault. Notify inbound traffic of the manual processing delay. Begin the maintenance request queue update. He had a template for this. He had used it 3 times before. He was on the second paragraph of the maintenance request when Dave crouched down beside the scanner housing with his toolbox. "I'll file the maintenance request," Kezzik said. "Standard procedure is to route inspections manually while we await." "How long does that usually take?" Dave asked, without looking up. He had the relay housing open. He was looking at it the way Kezzik looked at documents, with the calm attention of someone reading something familiar. "The previous requests have been in the queue for 22, 18, and 11 months respectively," Kezzik said. "The current estimate for maintenance priority review is..." "Right," Dave said. He reached into his toolbox, produced a length of connector cable, looked at it, put it back, and reached into a pouch on his belt. He unclipped something from the belt itself. A small component housing, brushed metal, that appeared to be part of his belt's power management system, and held it up to the relay connection. "This'll work," he said, apparently to himself. Kezzik's 6th fingers curled inward. "That is a component of your personal equipment," he said. "Attaching personal equipment to station infrastructure without authorization from..." The scanner made a sound, not a fault sound, a working sound. The diagnostic readout cycled, stabilized, and returned a green operational status. Dave pressed the relay housing closed, stood up. His knees made a sound of their own, brief and expressive, which he ignored, and dusted off his hands. "There it is," he said quietly. Kezzik stared at the scanner. The scanner ran a self-diagnostic. It returned the highest operational rating it had posted in 2 years. Kezzik opened a new incident report. He titled it, "UN Nihotrizid Equiprimin Modification. Cargo Scanner. Primary. Aramiri. Unit Kowalski D." He looked at the scanner. The scanner processed the first manual queue inspection with an accuracy rating of 99.7%. He looked at his incident report. He looked at the scanner. His hum shifted upward by approximately a quarter register and stayed there for the rest of the morning. He did not submit the report. He saved it to a folder he labeled, after a moment's consideration, "Administrative, pending review." Then he went to log the scanner as operational and found, when he opened the maintenance queue, that the 3 outstanding requests were still pending. He stared at them for a moment, then filed a 4th request, marked urgent, noting that the fault had been temporarily addressed through an improvised solution and that proper repair remained advisable. It was the most accurate thing he could put in an official record. He submitted it and felt slightly better. The scanner ran 11 more flawless inspections before the end of shift. The drones were named on day 3. Kezzik was at his processing terminal reviewing the morning manifest when he became aware, through the bay window, that Dave was doing something in the inspection bay that was not on the morning task list. He was moving through the bay in a slow circuit, stopping at each drone charging port in turn. His lips were moving. Kezzik watched this for approximately 90 seconds. Then he opened the bay intercom. "Is there a problem with the drone units?" "No," Dave said. "Just getting acquainted." He moved to the next port, looked at the drone Unit 4, the one with the navigation subroutine fault that made it describe small, inefficient circles when deployed, and nodded slightly. "This one's Biscuit," he said. Kezzik's compound eyes cycled. "The drone units are designated by number," he said. "Unit 1 through Unit 7. "Sure," Dave said agreeably. He moved to the next port. "This one's moving a little stiff on the left strut. That's a bearing issue probably." "Hello, Lefty." Kezzik closed the intercom. He opened a new incident report. He titled it UN San Sechen Nomenclator Ausschreibungen, Inspection Bay Drone Units, and then sat with his 6 fingers curled inward, looking at the title, and tried to identify which specific regulation had been violated by a person saying words in the direction of machinery. He could not find one. The drones were not affected. They did not know they had been named. They were machines. He deleted the report. His postural symmetry locked incrementally over the course of the next 20 minutes until by the time Captain Senna's freighter came through on its regular Korreth-9 transit, he was sitting with the precise, upright symmetry of someone who had been asked to remain very still during a medical procedure. Captain Senna came through the inspection bay in the slightly resigned way she always did, a Pelori, broad-shouldered and practical, with the weathered look of someone who had spent 12 years on this particular route and had made her peace with Korreth-9 being exactly what it was. "Morning, Kezzik," she said. "Nothing weird in the hold this time. Just machine components and 3 crates of agricultural processing equipment. I will require the standard manifest and certification," Kezzik said. Obviously, she handed them over, already looking past him at Dave, who had come in from the bay and was looking at her with the mild interest of someone who found most people worth a moment of attention. "New face," she said. "Dave Kowalski," Dave said. "Just started." He nodded at the processing desk where the arbitration file had been sitting for 16 months, thick with cross-referencing documentation, formally under review by an administrative panel that had thus far produced 3 preliminary assessments and 0 conclusions. "What's that one?" Sen glanced at the file. Her expression did a complicated thing. "Trade dispute. Pelori Consortium and the Drova-On logistics firm, the Vrethka Group. Tariff classification argument on processed hull composite. Been in arbitration since last year." Dave said. "What started it?" Kezzik looked up from the manifest. This was not a standard customs processing question. Captain Senna, however, appeared to find it a reasonable one, and Kezzik watched with his postural symmetry locked at maximum as she told Dave the full history of the dispute. The original misclassification, the counterfiling, the escalation, the 16 months of procedural back and forth, in the same pragmatic tone she used for everything, while Kezzik completed her inspection and filed her clearance and said nothing, because there was nothing procedurally incorrect about a conversation. Dave asked 4 more questions. They were good questions. Kezzik noticed this in the way he noticed things he had not expected to notice. At lunch, Dave produced items from a bag, a portion of dried fruit in a deep red-purple that Kezzik had not encountered before, something wrapped in foil that turned out to contain a dense grain-based food product, and a small sealed container of something whose smell hit Kezzik's olfactory sensors like an administrative irregularity, through some mechanism Kezzik did not fully follow. The Pelori Consortium's port representative, who was at Korreth-9 for a scheduled cargo processing review and had nothing to do with the arbitration, and the Vrethka Group's regional factor, who was transiting on an entirely separate matter, both ended up in the station's common area eating Dave's food. 40 minutes later, they had agreed on a modified tariff framework for hull composite classification. Kezzik's hand moved to the nearest reporting form before he had consciously decided to reach for it. He picked it up. He held it for a moment. He looked at the arbitration file, which was 16 months old and 4 inches thick, and then at the Pelori representative and the Vrethka factor, who were both eating the foil-wrapped food product and appeared to be having a conversation that was not adversarial. He put the form down. His subsonic hum stuttered, recovered, and resumed at a slightly higher register than before. "How did you know," he said when the representatives had gone, "that bringing them into the same space would—" "Didn't," Dave said. He was wrapping up the remaining dried fruit, but people eating together usually find it harder to stay mad. Basic principle. He looked at Kezzik. "You want some of this? It's from a place in Krakow." "Well, the synthesizer's version of a place in Krakow. It's not the same." Kezzik looked up Krakow. It was a city on Earth with significant historical and cultural associations, none of which appeared relevant to trade arbitration methodology. "No," he said. "Thank you. Suit yourself," Dave said, and finished the fruit. The atmospheric recycler had been making a sound for 14 months. Not a loud sound, a low rhythmic cycling irregularity, a hitch in the intake process that Kezzik's sensitive inner ear had logged on day 1 of its onset and filed a maintenance request about on day 3. The request had entered the queue. The queue had not, in 14 months, produced a technician. On day 4 of Dave's tenure, the sound stopped. Kezzik noticed its absence before he noticed anything else. The quality of the station's ambient sound had changed, a frequency he had been unconsciously compensating for simply no longer present. He stood in the corridor for a moment processing this, and then went to find Dave. Dave was in the equipment bay, closing his toolbox. The recycler panel was resecured. On the floor beside it were 3 components Kezzik did not recognize, and a length of connector tubing. "You repaired the atmospheric recycler," Kezzik said. "Rerouted the thermal exchange valve through the secondary coolant line," Dave said. He picked up his toolbox. The intake was cycling against itself. Basic pressure differential issue. Kezzik looked at the resecured panel. He looked at the components on the floor. "That technique is not in the Korreth-9 maintenance manual," he said, "nor in the Drova-An Administrative Systems Repair Index, volumes 1 through 8, including supplements." "Probably not," Dave agreed. "Where did you learn it?" Dave considered this. "Kandahar," he said. Kezzik had looked up Kandahar twice already, the second time in more detail than the first. "Kandahar," he said carefully, "is a region on Earth associated primarily with significant historical military conflict. It does not appear to have any atmospheric recycling infrastructure." Dave thought about this for a moment with the expression of someone genuinely considering whether the statement was accurate. "Yeah," he said, "that's about right." He picked up the components from the floor and put them in his toolbox. "The air quality's going to be better in here." The intake was pulling about 12% below optimal. He went to make coffee. Kezzik stood in the equipment bay and listened to the recycler running, quietly, smoothly, without the hitch, and did not open a report. His compound eyes cycled once, slowly, and then held steady. He decided after a moment not to ask a follow-up question about Kandahar. The vessel with the yellow flag came in on a Friday, the Human Week Friday, which Kezzik had come to think of as a Korreth-9 Friday through prolonged administrative contact, and it was flagged for a species with no registered biology profile in the Galactic database. Standard procedure was clear: hold the vessel, file a biology unknown quarantine request with the regional health authority, await classification guidance. The estimated processing time was 3 to 5 weeks. In 11 years of operation, Korreth-9 had received 2 yellow flag vessels. Both had been held for the full processing window. Both had cleared without incident. Kezzik was composing the quarantine filing when Dave came to look at the visual feed. "What do they look like?" he asked. Kezzik pulled up the interior scan. Small, multi-limed 2 individuals clustered in the forward cabin. "The species has no registered profile," he said. "Without classification data, we cannot assess. Do they look sick?" Dave said, "or do they look scared?" Kezzik looked at the scan. It was a distinction he had not considered, because the quarantine protocol did not make this distinction. A biology unknown species triggered yellow flag protocol regardless of apparent condition, and the condition assessment was the regional health authority's responsibility, not Korreth-9's. He looked at the 2 individuals on the scan. They were pressed close together, their limbs overlapping in what might be a comfort behavior. Their movement, when they moved, was small and quick and directed toward each other rather than toward exits or systems. "Scared," he said, and then, because it was accurate, "I think." "Yeah," Dave said. He looked at the scanner for a moment. Full environmental scan, isolated bay, biological sample collection, captain self-certification on basic biology. Not the approved protocol, but I don't see anything in the quarantine code that prohibits it as a preliminary step before filing." Kezzik's pressure sense flared as Dave moved quickly through the bay. He stood very still at his terminal. He pulled up the quarantine code. He read it. He read it again, the way he had read the joint posting notification. Once, twice, more slowly the third time. There was nothing that prohibited a preliminary environmental assessment prior to formal quarantine filing. The vessel cleared in 4 hours. The biology scan came back clean. No known pathogens, no environmental contaminants, no quarantine indicators of any registered type. The captain's self-certification confirmed a species with a standard carbon-based biology and no known communicable conditions. Kezzik added the data to the Regional Health Authority's voluntary unregistered species database. which would give the next inspector something to work with. He stared at the closed file for a long moment. 3 to 5 weeks had become 4 hours. He had not violated any regulation. He had, for the second time in a week, found a space between what the procedure required and what the procedure prohibited, and he had not been the one to find it. His 6 fingers pressed flat against his desk. He did not open a report. The delegation arrived on a Wednesday with no advance filing, no transit schedule entry, and no pre-arrival notification, which were 3 separate requirements under the Drovan Administrative Transit Code, the Interspecies Diplomatic Movement Protocols, and the Korreth-9 Station-Specific Operating Guidelines, respectively. There were 3 of them, small, bipedal, with the aggrieved bearing of people who had traveled a significant distance and expected someone to have been informed of their arrival. They produced documents in a script that Kezzik's translation suite processed at approximately 40% accuracy. They appeared to be unhappy about something. Kezzik's postural symmetry locked, his 6 fingers extended. His compound eyes cycled through 6 rapid focal adjustments. He began composing an emergency escalation to Administrator Prex, unscheduled diplomatic presence, no jurisdictional framework identified, requesting guidance on appropriate processing procedure. Dave offered them coffee. 2 of the 3 accepted. This appeared to surprise them. They accepted anyway, and Dave sat with them at the processing table and asked questions in the slow, patient way he asked questions. And the translation suite, running at 40% on the documents, performed considerably better on spoken language and gesture, and within 20 minutes Dave had established that their grievance concerned a tariff misclassification on 3 years of export filings from their home system. That's not actually Korreth-9's jurisdiction, Dave said to Kezzik without particular emphasis. That's a regional processing center data entry error. I can call over there. Kezzik's escalation to Prex was 70% complete. He looked at it. He looked at the delegation, 2 of whom were drinking human coffee with the careful expressions of people who had not expected to be offered anything and were recalibrating. He looked at Dave, who was already on the comm to the regional center. He withdrew the escalation. His hum dropped out for a full 3 seconds. The data entry error was corrected before the end of shift. The delegation left with documentation of the correction and what appeared to be a 3rd coffee, which the previously abstaining 3rd member had reconsidered. Kezzik stared at the empty processing table and thought about his 17 unsent reports, and thought about Kandahar, and thought about the scanner, which was still running at 99.7% accuracy, and thought about the arbitration file that was no longer 4 inches thick, but was instead a closed record in the resolved dispute folder. He did not open a new report. It was late shift, the station at its quietest when Dave asked. They were at their respective terminals. Kezzik reviewing documentation, Dave eating something from the food synthesizer that his olfactory sensors found aggressively complex, the kind of meal that announced itself from across the room. Kezzik had his 17 unsent reports open in a folder, not reading them, just aware of them the way he was aware of the recycler's silence. "What are you working on?" Dave asked. Not intrusively, just making conversation the way he did. "Administrative documentation," Kezzik said. Dave nodded. He ate. "Then, how long have you been here?" 30 years. Dave considered this. "That's a long time to be good at something," he said. Kezzik looked at his screen. He had a response prepared, the standard Drovan conversational acknowledgement, the confirmation that yes, continued service was the appropriate outcome of professional competence, the note that he had 4 years remaining until standard retirement eligibility. It was all accurate. None of it seemed like the thing Dave was actually asking. He saved his 17 reports. He closed the folder. Dave finished his meal and went quiet in the middle of putting away his utensils. Just for a moment, the private tiredness settling into the lines of his face with the unperformed quality of something he wasn't dramatizing, just existing. Then he came back, stood, and went to make coffee. His knees made their familiar comment on the process of standing. He ignored it. "Want any?" he asked. He always asked. He was always untroubled when Kezzik said no. "No," Kezzik said. "Thank you." Dave made his coffee. He came back to his terminal. He drank it. Kezzik's hum, without his deciding to change it, settled down to its low, slow, neutral register. It was the first time since Dave had arrived that it had been there. He noticed this distantly, the way you notice that a sound you had been compensating for has stopped. He did not put it in a report. The distress signal came in at 062, before first shift, while Kezzik was doing his morning transit review, and Dave was somewhere in the back of the station doing something with his toolbox. The vessel was a small independent transport, non-registered, which was unusual, sitting at the outer edge of Korreth-9's response radius with a partial systems failure and a medical emergency flag. The signal was automated and fragmented, the kind that triggered before a crew had the capacity to file proper distress documentation. Kezzik read the medical emergency indicator and felt his sixth fingers extend. He pulled up the jurisdictional framework. Non-registered vessel. No flag affiliation. The system the vessel had transited from had its own emergency response protocols, but the vessel was now in the space between jurisdictions, technically in Korreth-9's operational radius, but Korreth-9 was a customs and transit station, not an emergency response installation, and the applicable regulations were, he pulled them up, cross-referenced, checked the appendices. Not clear. 3 different regulatory bodies had overlapping but non-congruent authority over the area. Any unilateral action by Korreth-9 without authorization from at least one of the 3 would constitute a formal jurisdictional violation. He began composing the escalation. He opened channels to all 3 regulatory bodies simultaneously. He flagged the matter as urgent. Under standard processing parameters, he would expect a response, not a resolution, an initial response, within 6 to 8 weeks. He was on the second paragraph when Dave came out of the equipment room in an EVA suit. The suit was not regulation issue. It was well-maintained and functional and entirely, specifically not in the Korreth-9 equipment inventory. Kezzik stared at it. "What are you doing?" he said. "Going to help those people," Dave said. He was checking the helmet seal. "That vessel is not within our operational jurisdiction," Kezzik said. Under the Drova and Transit Authority Code, Section 14, and the Interspecies Emergency Response Protocols, Article 9, and the Outer Lane Management Framework, Chapter 3, Korreth-9 is a customs and transit facility without emergency response authorization, any unilateral action without. "Is there a regulation," Dave said, "that says I can't?" Kezzik stopped. He pulled up the regulations. He searched them the way he always searched, thoroughly, with the compound eye focus of someone who had spent 30 years living in documents. The Drovan Transit Authority Code said Korreth-9 did not have emergency response authorization. It did not say a Korreth-9 personnel member was prohibited from responding to a medical emergency in their operational radius. The Interspecies Emergency Response Protocols specified which bodies had authority to coordinate emergency response. They did not specify that other parties were prohibited from acting. The Outer Lane Management Framework addressed jurisdiction over vessels. It did not address individual personnel behavior. He kept searching. He found nothing. He looked up. Dave was at the airlock. "There is not," Kezzik said. "Right," Dave said. He put on his helmet. "If you can keep the station-to-vessel comm channel open, that'd be useful." "I will keep the channel open," Kezzik said. Dave went through the airlock. Kezzik stood at the observation window. He was not suited. He was not EBA qualified beyond standard emergency egress procedure. He was not, in any regulatory sense, able to do anything except what he was doing, standing at the window, keeping the comm channel open, and watching. Dave moved across the docking connection to the distressed vessel with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done something like this before and had learned not to rush it. The channel carried the sound of his breathing, steady, measured, the specific rhythm of someone regulating deliberately, the kind of breathing you learned in environments where the wrong speed was as dangerous as the wrong direction. His escalation requests to the 3 regulatory bodies were still open in the queue. He watched the airlock indicator and did not close them. 11 minutes in, Dave's voice came through the comm. "I've got them. 4 individuals. 2 adults. 2 children. The children are symptomatic. Looks like a temperature regulation issue. Probably hypoxia adjacent. I need the thermal foil from the emergency kit, second locker on the right." "I will get it," Kezzik said, which he had not planned to say, and then went and got it, and ran it to the inner airlock transfer port and felt, As he did, his pressure sense flare with the specific urgency of the situation in a way that was not painful, just large. 23 minutes after entering the airlock, Dave came back through it. He was moving carefully, the kind of careful that was not slowness, but weight management. One hand on the docking connection wall, the other arm guiding an adult who was guiding a child. Behind them came the second adult, carrying the second child who was wrapped in the emergency thermal foil. And wrapped in the thermal foil, held in both small upper limbs with the grip of someone who had been given something to hold on to and was holding it, was Dave's thermos. Kezzik did not know when Dave had given them the thermos. He had been watching the whole time, through the inner airlock window, as the family came through into the station's quarantine processing corridor. Kezzik watched Dave crouch down, slowly, with the vocal editorial from his knees to the level of the older child. The suit's external mic was off. Kezzik could not hear what Dave was saying. He watched Dave produce something from his suit pocket. Small, flat, and Kezzik could not see what it was from this angle, and show it to the child. He watched the child's limbs, which had been pressed tight and inward with the rigid economy of fear, shift. One limb extended slightly toward the object. Then the child's posture changed. Not relaxed, not yet, but opened, the way a door opens when someone tries the handle with the right amount of patience and not too much force. Kezzik's subsonic hum dropped out completely, his postural symmetry locked to absolute bilateral precision. His compound eyes held absolutely still, focused on the airlock window, and he stood there without moving and understood something that he did not have a regulation for. Dave stood back up. His knees made their remarks. He turned and saw Kezzik through the window and raised one hand. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement. The gesture of one person letting another person know that what they were worried about was going to be all right. Nearest mixed species medical facility, Dave said through the comm, his helmet off now, his voice in the easy post-effort register of someone who has done the thing, and the doing of it is complete. Can you look that up? Kezzik looked it up. The family was transferred within the hour. The vessel was stabilized. Dave made coffee. Kezzik's 17 unsent reports sat in their folder. He did not open them. The annual performance review arrived, as it always did, on the first of the month. Kezzik read through it with the thoroughness he brought to every document. Standard metrics, transit throughput, inspection accuracy rate, compliance filing timeliness, all within normal parameters, all above the benchmark. The station was performing at its historical standard. He filled in each field carefully and correctly. He reached the section titled Incident Summary. The field asked him to confirm the number of unresolved incidents for the review period. He looked at the station record. 0 unresolved incidents. The scanner, fixed with a belt buckle component, running at 99.7% accuracy. The recycler, silent for the first time in 14 months, fixed by a technique from a place with no atmospheric recycling infrastructure. The trade dispute, resolved over dried fruit from somewhere in Krakow. The arbitration file, closed. The biology unknown vessel, cleared in 4 hours. The diplomatic delegation, corrected and departed. The family, transferred and receiving treatment. He opened the folder with his 17 reports. He read them. He looked at each entry. The authorization violations, the undocumented modifications, the unscheduled interventions, the protocol deviations, and for each one found, when he looked from the report to the outcome, the same gap. The report described what had happened. The outcome described what had resulted. They were not, in any case, the same story. He certified the record. Then he sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk, his posture precisely upright, the silence of the correctly running recycler, the only sound in the operations center. Outside in the bay, he was aware, without quite being able to identify when this had happened, that Unit 4 was circling in its small, inefficient circles, and that he thought of it as biscuit without deciding to, and had been doing so for several days. He opened a new document. He had never opened this document before. The commendation and citation form, personnel, outstanding service designation, was 6 pages long, had 43 fields, required supporting documentation, a supervisor countersignature, and a rationale statement of no fewer than 200 words. He read the entire form carefully, the way he read every form, completely, including the footnotes. The footnote specified formatting requirements for the rationale statement and clarified that the supporting documentation could include operational records, incident reports, or first-person observations at the inspector's discretion. He filled in every field. He wrote the rationale statement. It was 312 words, which was not as long as his preparatory incident prevention framework document, but was more precise. He described the scanner, and the recycler, and the arbitration, and the quarantine vessel, and the delegation, and the distress signal, and the family. And one other thing he had been thinking about since a late shift when Dave had said, "That's a long time to be good at something," and Kezzik had not had a response that fit into a standard conversational format. He described the 17 incident reports he had not filed, and said that the decision not to file them was not a failure of professional rigor, but its expression. That he had learned, in the period under review, the difference between recording what happened and understanding what mattered, and that the distinction was not as clear as he had previously believed, and that the period under review had been the most professionally instructive of his career. 312 words. He submitted the form before he could change his mind. He sat back. The recycler hummed. Not a drove-on hum, just the mechanical sound of a system functioning correctly. He listened to it. Outside, through the bay window, Biscuit moved in its small patient circles. Unit 4, Biscuit. He found that he did not have strong feelings about the distinction. He opened a new document. He began composing a formal request for an additional year on his posting at Korreth-9. The language was careful and correct. His language always was, and in the justification field he wrote, "Given recent operational developments, the inspector believes that the current posting presents continued professional development opportunities that warrant an extension of the standard assignment period." He had 4 years to retirement. He was, he decided, prepared to consider that estimate approximate. He submitted the extension request. He closed his terminal. He sat in the quiet of the operations center at the end of a shift, at the end of a year, at what had become, without fully announcing itself, something different from what he had expected. Dave came in from the back of the station with his thermos, refilled, somehow, always somehow, and put a second cup on the processing desk beside Kezzik's terminal without asking, the way he always did. Kezzik looked at the cup. He looked at Dave, who was already at his own terminal, and reading his tablet at arm's length and squinting at it in the particular way that suggested he had, again, not adjusted the text size. "I filed the commendation," Kezzik said. Dave looked up from his tablet. He processed this for a moment. 43 fields, he said. "Yes. Supervisor countersignature. I have noted the requirement. Administrator Prex's office has a processing time of 4 to 6 weeks. Dave nodded. He looked at his tablet. He looked back at Kezzik. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile. Something quieter than that, the expression of someone who has heard something and is letting it settle into the correct place. "Thanks," he said. "It was accurate," Kezzik said. "The form required accuracy. I provided it." Dave looked at him for a moment with the same mild attention he gave to most things, the attention that noticed what was actually there. "Sure," he said. He went back to his tablet. Kezzik looked at the cup of coffee beside his terminal. He had not consumed coffee in 30 years of service at Korreth-9. He was not certain, from a biological standpoint, that it was advisable. He had not looked into it. He had been meaning to look into it and had not. The recycler hummed. Biscuit circled. The station ran its evening cycle, the quiet transit of a mid-tier way station at the junction of 3 minor shipping lanes at the edge of a territory that did not consider it important. It was not an important station. Kezzik had always known this. He had built his career here precisely because importance had never seemed like the relevant measure. Correct was the relevant measure. Complete. Every report filed, every form accurate, every incident resolved. He had 17 incident reports that had never been filed, and a station record with 0 unresolved incidents for the year. Both of these things were true. He was still working out how they fit together, and he suspected he would be working on it for some time, and he found, looking at the cup on the desk beside his terminal, that he did not mind this. He picked up the coffee. He did not drink it yet. He just held it, the warmth of it real through the cup, present and specific in the way that things you've been offered are, not weightless, not procedural. Here, actual. He held it, and the recycler hummed, and the station kept on being exactly what it had always been. And Kezzik sat in the quiet of it and thought that 4 years from retirement was, as estimates went, extremely flexible. There it was.